Hey guys, tonight we're diving into one of the strangest and most oddly specific chapters of modern history. The time people started swallowing hundreds of anti-diarrhea pills on purpose. Yes, the tiny white tablets meant to stop your stomach from doing Olympic gymnastics after questionable tacos. The medicine your grandma keeps in a dusty bathroom cabinet next to the Band-Aids and expired cough syrup. Tonight's story is about the very real, very bizarre moment when people discovered that if you take enough Imodium, like an amount that would make a pharmacist faint, you could trick your brain into thinking you'd just taken something much stronger. But as you might imagine, turning a humble diarrhea medication into a do-it-yourself chemistry experiment did not go well. So before we dive in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy these strange little journeys through history and human decision-making. And thank you again for suggesting this topic. It's been such a fascinating one to explore. Feel free to comment where you're listening from and what time it is. Somehow these videos always seem to find people at the exact moment they should probably be asleep. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. Get comfortable, stretch out, and settle in. And let's get curious for a second. Have you ever wondered what happens when desperation meets the internet? What makes someone look at a tiny anti-diarrhea pill and think, I bet if I take 300 of these, something interesting will happen? Why did pharmacists suddenly start locking up a medicine that used to sit quietly on every drugstore shelf next to toothpaste? How did a medication designed to slow down your intestines end up stopping people's hearts instead? And perhaps the most confusing question of all, why did anyone think this was a good idea in the first place? Tonight, you're about to find out. Because congratulations, you've just woken up sometime around the early 2010s in the middle of America's opioid crisis. Your back hurts. Your brain feels like it's wrapped in sandpaper. And somewhere on the internet, a forum post is telling you that if you swallow an absolutely unreasonable amount of anti-diarrhea pills, you might be able to get high. Good luck. At first glance, the anti-diarrhea section of a pharmacy is not exactly the place you expect to find the beginning of a public health crisis. It's usually a quiet little corner of the store, populated by awkwardly labelled medications promising to restore digestive balance. You walk past it quickly, pretending you're not reading the boxes too closely. But tucked among these humble products is Loperamide, better known as Imodium, a medication originally designed to do one very specific job: slow your intestines down when your stomach decides to declare war on civilization. Now picture the scene more clearly. You're standing in a modern pharmacy sometime in the early 2010s. The fluorescent lights hum softly overhead. Somewhere nearby, a refrigerator quietly guards its stockpile of yogurt drinks that claim to help your gut health, which sounds impressive until you realize it mostly means yogurt. The anti-diarrhea shelf sits low, almost shy, as if it understands that no one enjoys browsing here. Cold medicine gets the flashy packaging. Allergy pills have pictures of people running through meadows. But anti-diarrhea medicine? That section looks like it was designed by someone who whispered the words while apologizing. Restore digestive balance. Gentle relief. Fast-acting comfort. All phrases that politely avoid saying the real problem. You glance at the boxes quickly, the way people read the dessert menu when they're pretending not to want cake. Maybe you grab one. Maybe you pretend you're buying it for someone else. Maybe you toss in a pack of gum to make the purchase look less suspicious, as though the cashier might assume you're just wildly enthusiastic about chewing minty freshness. And there it is. Imodium. A tiny box containing small tablets that look about as exciting as a chalk mint from your grandmother's candy dish. The instructions are simple. Take 2 tablets. Wait. Allow your digestive system to calm down, like a toddler who has finally realized screaming won't get them a pony. For decades, that's all it ever did. Doctors trusted it. Pharmacists stocked it without a second thought. Travellers carried it the same way they carried sunscreen or headache pills, just another sensible precaution for life's unpredictable moments. It was in every possible sense a boring medication, and boring medications are usually the safest kind. After all, the goal of a good anti-diarrhea drug is not excitement. You don't want thrills, you don't want dramatic side effects. You want your stomach to quietly stop behaving like a broken washing machine. Loperamide was very good at this. It worked by slowing down the movement of the intestines. Normally, when your digestive system gets upset, perhaps because of questionable street tacos, suspicious seafood, or that leftover pasta you definitely should have thrown away, your gut speeds everything up. Loperamide steps in like a calm traffic officer, waving the digestive chaos into slower, more orderly lanes. Relax, slow down. Let's not rush this whole situation. And for millions of people, that's exactly what it did. Quietly, effectively, without drama, which is precisely why nobody suspected that this tiny pill, this humble little traffic officer of the intestines, would someday become the centre of one of the strangest chapters in modern drug history. Because right now, as you stand in this quiet pharmacy aisle, everything seems perfectly normal. The shelves are neat, the boxes are untouched. The boxes. And the medication sitting there was designed for only one thing: helping your stomach survive a bad day. Nothing more, nothing less. At least that's what everyone thought. Loperamide was first developed in the late 1960s by researchers looking for a safer way to treat diarrhea. On paper, it looked suspiciously like an opioid, chemically speaking. But scientists had designed it with a clever twist. It worked in the gut, not the brain. Which meant it could calm your digestive system without making you high. In other words, it was the responsible cousin of drugs like morphine, same family, but firmly grounded in the digestive tract. Now, that might sound a little alarming at first. You hear the word opioid and immediately picture powerful hospital drugs, whispered warnings from doctors, and prescription bottles with labels that practically glare at you. But chemically speaking, families of drugs can be very large, a bit like cousins at a giant reunion where some are responsible accountants and others are currently banned from Thanksgiving. Loperamide belonged to that extended family, but it was the quiet one who stayed home and filed taxes early. Its job was simple. Your digestive system is lined with tiny receptors that respond to opioids. When those receptors are activated, the muscles in your intestines slow down. Food moves through your gut more slowly. Water has time to be absorbed, which is very helpful when your stomach is trying to evacuate everything like it's abandoning a sinking ship. So when you take a normal dose of loperamide, usually just 2 small tablets, the drug travels through your bloodstream and attaches to those receptors in your gut. The result? Your digestive system relaxes. The frantic sprint to the nearest bathroom slows to a polite jog, and eventually peace returns to your abdomen. But here's the clever part. Scientists knew opioids could affect the brain in ways that cause pain relief, sedation, and sometimes euphoria. That's what makes drugs like morphine powerful, and also potentially dangerous. So when they designed loperamide, they built in a kind of safety feature. Your brain is protected by something called the blood-brain barrier. Think of it as an extremely picky security guard standing at the entrance to the brain's nightclub. Only certain molecules get past the velvet rope. Water? Sure. Oxygen? Absolutely. But loperamide? The guard takes one look and says, "Not tonight." Special proteins in the body actively pump loperamide back out of the brain before it can do anything interesting. The drug gets bounced right back into the bloodstream and sent down to the digestive tract where it belongs. It's the pharmaceutical equivalent of being escorted politely, but firmly, out of a building. So under normal conditions, loperamide does its work entirely in the gut. No buzz, no high. No dramatic effects. Just quiet intestinal diplomacy. And for decades, that design worked beautifully. Doctors appreciated it because it reduced the risk of misuse. Pharmacists liked it because it was safe enough to sell over the counter. Travellers loved it because nothing ruins a vacation faster than discovering your stomach has strong opinions about foreign street food. So millions of people used loperamide exactly the way it was intended. 2 tablets, maybe 4 at most, a glass of water, and the comforting knowledge that modern chemistry had solved one of life's most inconvenient problems. It was, by every measure, a very responsible pill, which makes what happened next so strange, because somewhere down the line someone looked at this carefully designed, extremely polite medication and wondered if there might be a way to sneak it past the brain security guard after all. And once that thought appeared, well, you can probably guess what curious humans decided to try next. Under normal circumstances, loperamide behaves like the most boring opioid in existence. The reason is something called the blood-brain barrier, a microscopic security system that protects your brain from substances floating around in your bloodstream. Special transporter proteins basically grab loperamide molecules and escort them right back out before they can reach your brain. So the drug stays in your intestines, doing its job quietly while your brain remains blissfully unimpressed. Now imagine your brain as the most exclusive nightclub in the universe. Not the kind with sticky floors and questionable music choices. No, this one is extremely selective. Velvet ropes everywhere. Security guards that have advanced degrees in molecular chemistry. Your brain, after all, is the most delicate piece of equipment you own. It runs the whole operation, breathing, thinking, remembering where you left your car keys 3 days ago. Well, sometimes. So nature built an incredibly strict security system to protect it. That system is the blood-brain barrier. If a molecule wants to enter the brain, it has to pass inspection. Only certain substances get through easily. Oxygen, glucose, a few small nutrients. Everything else gets stopped at the door. And this is where loperamide runs into trouble. When you swallow a normal dose, 2 tablets, maybe 4, the medication enters your bloodstream like any other drug. It travels through the body, circulating calmly like a commuter train making predictable stops. Eventually, some of those molecules drift toward the brain. But waiting there at the entrance are special proteins called P-glycoprotein transporters. You don't need to remember the name. Just imagine them as very serious bouncers. A loperamide molecule approaches the brain. The bouncer squints at it. Opioid-shaped, he mutters. The molecule tries to sneak past. Nope. The transporter grabs it, spins it around, and politely shoves it back into the bloodstream. Nice try, the bouncer says. Your party is in the intestines, and back the molecule goes. This process happens over and over again, thousands of times. Every loperamide molecule that drifts toward the brain gets bounced out like an underdressed tourist trying to enter a 5-star restaurant. So instead of affecting the brain, the drug accumulates where it was meant to work. The digestive tract. There it attaches to opioid receptors embedded in the intestinal walls, and the effect is very simple. The muscles of your gut slow down. Food moves more slowly. Water gets absorbed. The chaotic digestive traffic jam begins to calm down. It's like switching your intestines from highway mode to a quiet country road, which is exactly what you want when your stomach has been behaving like it's hosting an emergency evacuation drill. And for decades this system worked perfectly. Loperamide became one of the most widely trusted over-the-counter medications in the world. It was considered extremely safe when used correctly. Doctors recommended it. Travellers packed it. Parents kept it in bathroom cabinets next to thermometers and expired cough syrup. No one worried about it causing a high, because biologically speaking, it couldn't. The security guards at the Brains nightclub were doing their job, strictly, efficiently, relentlessly. 2 pills, blocked. 4 pills, still blocked. Even slightly higher doses would usually get bounced out before they could cause any effects in the brain. So loperamide stayed what it was meant to be. A quiet, practical medication that handled a very specific problem with very little drama. In other words, the most boring opioid in pharmaceutical history, which is exactly how scientists designed it. But humans, as you may have noticed, have a long tradition of looking at carefully designed safety systems and asking a single dangerous question: what happens if we take a lot more? And that question, asked somewhere on the internet late at night by someone feeling curious or desperate, would eventually turn this extremely boring medication into something much stranger. Because while the brain security guards were very good at their jobs, they had never really planned for someone showing up with 300 pills. Now let's zoom forward to the early 2000s, when prescription opioid medications were becoming alarmingly widespread. Drugs like oxycodone and hydrocodone were handed out for everything from back pain to dental work. At first, they seemed like miracle pills, but as dependency grew and regulations tightened, many people suddenly found themselves cut off from medications their bodies had become used to. You wake up one morning in that era, long before anyone fully understood what was coming. Your doctor has given you a small orange bottle for your injured shoulder, or your wisdom tooth removal, or that lingering back pain from lifting something you absolutely should not have lifted. The instructions are simple. Take one pill every few hours for pain. Be careful. Don't drive. Drink water. And for a while, everything makes sense. Because opioids work, that was the problem. They didn't just dull pain. They wrapped the edges of your nervous system in soft felt and told your brain, "Hey buddy, everything's fine." You could sleep. You could work. You could smile again. These pills felt like medical magic, arriving at a time when chronic pain was increasingly common and solutions were increasingly rare. But then something subtle begins to happen. Your body adjusts. What helped yesterday doesn't help quite as much today. The pill that once made you comfortable now barely smooths the edges. Pain relief becomes less of a miracle and more of a negotiation. And slowly, almost invisibly, dependence starts to build. Not because you wanted it, not because you were reckless, but because your biology was doing what biology does, adapting. Fast forward again. Doctors begin noticing patterns. Patients are asking for refills sooner, stronger doses, different pills, regulators step in, guidelines tighten, prescription monitoring systems roll out. Suddenly doctors are being told to prescribe less, taper more, and in many cases stop entirely. But your body doesn't receive that memo. It only knows that something it relied on, something that made life feel manageable, is suddenly gone. And that's when withdrawal slinks in. Withdrawal is not dramatic Hollywood sweating and flopping around. It's subtler at first, a sense of unease, a restlessness in your legs. Your stomach begins to tangle itself into knots. You feel too hot and too cold at the same time. Your skin crawls. Your joints ache like you've aged 20 years overnight. You tell yourself it's temporary. Just a day or two. Your doctor said to tough it out. But the thing no one emphasized was that opioid withdrawal is not simply uncomfortable. It is biologically punishing. A full system revolt that makes your nervous system feel flayed and raw. Sleep disappears, appetite vanishes, anxiety skyrockets. The world becomes one long, unbearable countdown until it stops. You start searching for relief anywhere you can find it, and you're not alone. All across the country, thousands of people are hitting this same wall at the same time. Pain patients, surgery patients, people with chronic injuries, parents, grandparents, workers, students. People who never saw themselves as addicted because no one had explained how easily dependence could develop. The medical establishment, alarmed by rising misuse, pulls back quickly, too quickly for many bodies to adjust, and desperate bodies make desperate decisions. Some people start doctor shopping, hoping another clinic will refill their prescription. Others turn to stronger street drugs, cheaper, easier to find, exponentially more dangerous. And others begin scouring the internet for anything that might take the edge off withdrawal. This is where the digital age steps in with unearned confidence. Online forums begin filling with late-night posts from exhausted people, whisper typing into the void. What helps opioid withdrawal? What else can I take? What works? You read thread after thread. Some suggestions are harmless, some are bizarre, some are deeply unsafe. And in this era of frantic Googling and crowdsourced survival strategies, one strange idea begins to circulate. There might be something on the drugstore shelf that could help. Not a narcotic, not a prescription, something ordinary, something no one thinks about, something that works on opioid receptors even if it's supposed to stay in the gut. A tiny, chalky tablet with a green or blue label. Loperamide, Imodium, a medication designed to slow your intestines, not soothe your brain. But right now, in this moment of withdrawal, people aren't looking for perfection. They're looking for anything that feels like a lifeline. And so the stage quietly sets for one of the strangest episodes in pharmaceutical history, a moment where desperation, misinformation and chemistry collide on the most innocent shelf in America. Around this time, something fascinating and troubling was happening online. Internet forums were becoming gathering places where people shared tips, tricks, and sometimes catastrophically bad ideas about drugs. Somewhere in those threads, someone noticed that Loperamide looked chemically similar to opioids, and that observation planted a very dangerous seed. Picture yourself sitting in front of an old laptop at 2 a.m. The room is dark except for the glow of the screen, which somehow makes everything feel slightly more dramatic. Your search history is already a graveyard of desperate phrases typed into Google. How to stop withdrawal, opioid detox home remedies, why does my skin feel like electricity? Modern adulthood looks different in the midnight hours. You stumble into an online forum, one of those sprawling digital communities where strangers gather under usernames like Pain Warrior IT Evan or Cold Turkey Champion. Threads stretch endlessly, full of people comparing symptoms, solutions and stories that are equal parts hopeful and heartbreaking. At first, the advice is normal enough. Drink water, take hot showers, try herbal teas that smell like regret. But the deeper you scroll, the stranger it gets. Human beings, when left unsupervised on the internet, will invent entire medical theories using nothing but hope, half-remembered chemistry class, and a dangerous level of confidence. And buried in those late-night discussions is a comment that looks almost innocent. Hey, isn't Loperamide technically an opioid? Someone else replies, yeah, it binds to the same receptors in the gut. A third person adds, so maybe if you take enough, it could work on the brain too. It's typed casually, offhandedly, like someone suggesting you try adding paprika to your chili. But your brain catches the idea instantly. You feel a little spark of curiosity, dangerous curiosity. Because to a person wrestling with withdrawal, the idea that a legal over-the-counter medication might offer relief feels like stumbling across a secret passageway in a collapsing building. And so the forum begins doing what forums do best, turning speculation into myth. People start researching Loperamide's chemical structure, comparing molecular diagrams with the enthusiasm of children trading Pokemon cards. Someone posts screenshots of scientific papers they definitely did not read all the way through. Others share anecdotal experiments, followed by the classic internet disclaimer. This isn't medical advice. But, and here's the thing, Loperamide does look suspiciously like an opioid. The molecules share enough features that, on paper, you could convince yourself they're cousins, close enough that maybe, just maybe, one could stand in for the other. Never mind that the whole design of the drug was meant to prevent exactly that. Never mind that the blood-brain barrier exists specifically to keep molecules like this out. Never mind that researchers fully intended loperamide to be boring. To the collective imagination of an online community desperate for relief, none of that matters. All they see is the loophole, the theoretical possibility, the chemical resemblance. And once one person suggests it, 10 more consider it. 20 more experiment. 30 more claim they felt something, even if that something was mostly placebo mixed with a stomach cramp. Internet forums thrive on patterns, real or imagined. Before long, whispers become rumours. Rumours become theories. Theories become guides. People begin typing out instructions like they're posting recipes. Try 50 milligrams first. Nah, you need at least 100 milligrams to feel it. Stack it with this other thing to block the brain barrier. Modern alchemy performed by amateurs with a Wi-Fi connection. You can practically watch the idea go viral, not in the social media sense, but in the slow, organic way that desperation spreads information. Someone on one coast tries it. Someone in a different country tries it. A teenager posts about it. A grandfather posts about it. The forums light up with discussion, and the dangerous seed grows roots. Because once the internet believes it has discovered a loophole, especially a loophole involving over-the-counter medication, it won't let go easily. You sit back, reading the threads, feeling a mixture of skepticism and rising hope. Maybe this could work. Maybe this could be the thing that gets you through the night without collapsing into the cold, electric misery of withdrawal. And somewhere deep inside the world's quietest drugstore aisle, a humble anti-diarrhea pill begins its strange and unexpected ascent into internet folk medicine. Not because it wanted to, but because the internet decided it might. And once the internet gets an idea, good luck convincing it otherwise. Users on online forums began referring to loperamide as the poor man's methadone. The idea was simple, if wildly reckless. If normal doses didn't reach the brain, maybe extremely large doses might overwhelm the body's defences. Not 10 pills, not 20, but hundreds. Now imagine reading that for the first time. You're scrolling through an endless thread of strangers comparing withdrawal symptoms like battle scars, and suddenly someone casually suggests a dose that sounds less like medicine and more like a math error. You blink at the screen. Hundreds. Surely that's a joke. Surely no one would try that. But the replies prove otherwise. People start chiming in, some hesitant, some enthusiastic, some concerningly scientific, given that their knowledge of physiology seems to come from half-watched YouTube videos. They talk about breaking past the blood-brain barrier the way people talk about breaking into a locked shed, as if it's just a matter of force, not biology. And the logic goes something like this. If the body's transporter proteins kick out the loperamide, maybe taking more would create a kind of molecular traffic jam. Too many molecules, not enough bouncers. Some might slip through. It's the pharmaceutical equivalent of trying to sneak into a concert by overwhelming the security guards with a flash mob of poorly behaved molecules. A terrible plan, but desperation has a way of making terrible plans sound innovative. In these online spaces, the phrase poor man's methadone begins spreading. It has a ring to it, catchy, grimly poetic, and deeply misleading. Methadone is a carefully controlled medication designed to stabilize opioid dependence under medical supervision. Loperamide, meanwhile, is designed to prevent you from spending quality time in a gas station bathroom. But mythology grows fast in digital soil. Someone posts a guide explaining how many pills they took. Someone else refines the method. A third person types out a warning that sounds like the bare minimum legal requirement. This worked for me, but be careful guys, LOL. The LL does a lot of emotional labour here. You can almost feel the shift in tone as more users begin treating Loperamide as if it's a scrappy underdog of the opioid world. A misunderstood little tablet with untapped potential, ready to save them from withdrawal, if only people would give it a chance. Meanwhile, in real life, the situation becomes increasingly surreal. You imagine yourself standing in a pharmacy aisle picking up a box of Imodium. Each pill contains 2 milligrams. 2. To reach the doses being discussed online, 100 milligrams, 200 milligrams, 300 milligrams, you'd need handfuls, entire bottles, entire shelves, enough tablets to fill a small candy bowl, though they would be the worst candies imaginable. And here's the real kicker. Loperamide tablets are tiny, chalky and dry. Trying to swallow 100 of them is less like taking medication and more like attempting to eat gravel. People describe the process in forums as if it's a heroic trial, a kind of gastrointestinal initiation ritual. You sit with a stack of blister packs, popping pills like you're unboxing micro-sized Pokemon, except these ones definitely don't bring joy. As the idea spreads, users begin comparing notes. What dose works for you? Does it kick in fast? Should I combine it with something else to make it stronger? Has anyone felt their heartbeat do something weird? That last question should be a red flag the size of Montana, but online, red flags often look like minor speed bumps. And the myth of loperamide as a withdrawal cure gains momentum. It's cheap, it's accessible, it's legal. You don't need a prescription. You don't need a doctor. You don't need to walk into a clinic and confront the embarrassment of asking for help. All you need is a credit card, a pharmacy aisle, and a willingness to swallow enough pills to alarm an archaeologist centuries from now when they find your skeleton surrounded by a suspicious quantity of empty blister packs. And so the idea crystallizes. You don't need methadone. You have Imodium. The poor man's methadone, a title that sounds sympathetic and practical until you realise that the poor man in this story is being given advice by strangers who have no medical training, no accountability, and no idea how close this solution is to a cardiac catastrophe. But you don't know that yet. Not here, in this moment, on this quiet night in front of your computer, right now, right. All you know is that someone claims the impossible. There might be a loophole, and loopholes, especially in times of desperation, are very hard to resist. Somewhere, someone tried it. Perhaps out of desperation during withdrawal, perhaps out of curiosity, perhaps because the internet said it might work. And when the story spread that massive doses could dull withdrawal symptoms, more people began experimenting with it. Picture that first person. It's late at night, the kind of night where the hours feel stretched thin and your thoughts echo too loudly. You're pacing around your kitchen with withdrawal crawling beneath your skin like static electricity. You open the cabinet. Painkillers, gone. Prescriptions, cut off. Your body is aching, shivering, buzzing with the kind of discomfort that makes you feel like a marionette being jerked around by invisible strings. And sitting quietly on the shelf is a bottle of Imodium. You stare at it. You think about the forum posts, the molecular diagrams someone drew in MS Paint. The users insisting this actually works, bro. The warnings that seem half-hearted, like they were added out of obligation rather than fear. You turn the bottle in your hands. The label says, take 2 pills. The internet says, take 50. Your brain says you're out of options. So you sit down at the kitchen table, open the bottle, and begin the strangest experiment of your life. The first pills go down easily. Too easily. They're tiny, chalky, the pharmaceutical equivalent of breath mints. But then 20 becomes 30. 30 becomes 40. You're swallowing them with water, then juice, then anything you can find because your throat is getting tired. Halfway through, you start wondering whether the worst part of withdrawal might actually be the swallowing, and then nothing. Nothing for an hour, nothing for 2. Maybe a faint sense of calm, but is that from the drug or the hope? Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, someone else is doing the same thing, because once one person posts a success story, no matter how vague, no matter how placebo-fueled, others latch onto it. Humans learned fire by watching someone else burn themselves. This is not a new behaviour. In the morning, someone logs onto the forum and writes, "Took 80 milligrams last night. Felt something. Might have helped." Another user replies, "Didn't work for me at 100 milligrams, trying 120 tonight." Someone else, emboldened, posts, "Withdrawal almost gone. Need to go higher." And now a pattern begins forming, messy, inconsistent, reckless, but undeniably spreading. These early experiments become a kind of community science project, except there are no lab coats, no ethics boards, no safety goggles, and the only data collection method is vibes. People describe what they feel in long rambling posts. "My stomach is calmer. I slept a little. Didn't feel sick this morning. Still had chills, but not as bad. Think I took too much. Heart feels weird." That last one should stop the whole conversation. It doesn't. Instead, someone responds with, "Happened to me too. Try spacing doses out. Beautiful advice, if the goal is continued survival of the experiment, not the experimenter." Soon you have dozens of people running trials on their own bodies, treating their digestive systems like laboratory beakers. Some get mild relief, some feel nothing, some feel nauseated, dizzy or panicked. But the posts that get the most attention are the glowing ones. The ones that hint that maybe, possibly, theoretically, this ridiculous plan could work. And that's all addiction ever really needs, a rumour of relief. Meanwhile, others begin tinkering with the method, take pills with grapefruit juice, spread doses throughout the day, take boosting medications that might trick the blood-brain barrier, chase pills with fatty foods to enhance absorption. These are not strategies born from medical journals. These are the potions of modern alchemists, brewed from equal parts folklore and hope. The experimentation grows bolder, stranger, more extreme. Someone claims they took 200 milligrams, someone else brags about 300 milligrams as if it's a personal achievement. A third person posts a picture of an empty Costco-sized Imodium bottle with the caption, "Round 2 tonight." And in the comments below, people cheer them on. It would be darkly funny if it weren't so dangerous. Because every experiment has consequences. Every extreme dose pushes the boundaries of what the human body can tolerate. Every success story hides a dozen failures, ones never posted, never shared, never seen. But the forums don't know that. You don't know that. Here at the beginning, everything feels like discovery. Like maybe the internet has stumbled upon a secret pharmaceutical hack. Like maybe science didn't try hard enough to keep loperamide out of the brain. The truth is far less romantic. Your body wasn't designed for this experiment. Your heart definitely wasn't. But right now, in the dim glow of your computer monitor, that danger feels distant, theoretical, abstract. And the possibility of relief? That feels close. So the experiments continue, and a quiet, tiny pill, once designed to solve a problem no one likes to talk about, begins its journey from the stomach to the bloodstream, and eventually, for some people, into far darker territory. Imagine sitting at a kitchen table with a bottle of anti-diarrheal medication. Now imagine opening 10 bottles, 20 bottles, each containing tiny tablets meant to be taken 2 at a time. To reach the doses people were discussing online, someone might have to swallow 200 or 300 pills in a single day. Now pause and picture that in real time. There's a moment, right before the experiment begins, when you stare at the mountain of pills in front of you and realize this has officially stopped resembling medicine and has entered the territory of ill-advised science fair project. The kitchen table looks less like a place where meals are shared and more like a pharmacy shelf that collapsed under its own existential dread. You begin by peeling open blister packs, dozens of them. Each pack makes that soft crink sound as you bend the foil, as if even the packaging is trying to warn you. One by one, the tiny green or white tablets fall out onto the table, bouncing around like little mint-coloured marbles. By the time you're done, the surface is covered in pills. Covered. As in, if someone walked in right now, they would assume you were reenacting a scene from a crime documentary. Then comes the swallowing. The forums made it sound simple enough, like tossing back a handful of peanuts. But loperamide tablets are dry. Very dry. They cling to your tongue like they're filing for permanent residency. The first 10 go down fine. The next 10 go down with water. By the time you reach 30, your jaw hurts from gulping. At 50, you're reconsidering all your life choices. At 100, you're pretty sure you've just invented a new Olympic sport called extreme hydration. Your stomach begins forming opinions, not expressed politely. These opinions include, why are we doing this? Are you sure this is food? This feels like a prank. Please stop. Your intestines, meanwhile, remain ominously quiet, like they're gathering lawyers. Still, you continue, because the internet said 200 pills might be the sweet spot, a phrase that makes absolutely no sense when referencing anti-diarrheal medication. But there you are, swallowing handfuls in cycles, 20 pills, drink water, breathe, repeat. The process takes hours, literal hours. You take bathroom breaks between rounds, but ironically you're not going for the usual reason associated with loperamide. You're going because your stomach is staging a protest march and your heart is beating hard enough to audition for a metal band. Somewhere around pill 150 you begin questioning physics. How much space is in the human stomach? Is this why snakes swallow their food whole? Are tablets compressible? Can loperamide expand? Should you chew them? No, you absolutely should not. Should you have mixed them into applesauce like a toddler? Why didn't the forums recommend that? You look around your kitchen. The water bottle is empty. The chair is uncomfortable. The room feels strangely warm. And you start to notice that time has slowed down, not because of the medication, but because taking 300 pills is the sort of activity that bends space-time out of sheer stubbornness. Then there's the real logistical nightmare, buying that many pills in the first place. To get 300 tablets, you need multiple boxes, sometimes dozens. And pharmacies do not stock infinite amounts of anti-diarrheal medication. A suspicious cashier might raise an eyebrow, so people get creative. One store on Monday, another store on Tuesday, gas stations, grocery stores, convenience stores, bulk packages ordered online. You become a weird sort of scavenger, roaming the suburbs like a digestive cryptid, collecting tiny boxes with a determination that would impress an archaeologist. But the strangest part is the dual nature of the task, the desperation and the absurdity. Part of you is deeply aware that you're doing this because withdrawal is unbearable, because your body feels hijacked, because something inside you is begging for relief. But the other part of you, the part struggling to swallow pill number 212, recognizes how surreal this moment is. You're sitting at a kitchen table swallowing anti-diarrheal medication like you're in some dystopian version of the Cinnamon Challenge. And the irony, this medication is designed to slow things down. Your intestines, your digestion, your bathroom schedule, not your withdrawal symptoms, not your cravings, not your pain. But you don't know that yet. Right now, all you know is that you've swallowed an amount of tablets that would make a pharmacist faint. And now, as the mountain of pills disappears and your stomach feels like a small pharmacy has opened inside it, you wait. Because for all the logistics, the swallowing, the shopping, the sorting, the water chugging, the most dangerous part comes next. What happens when your body tries to process what you've just asked it to do? The human body, as it turns out, is not particularly thrilled about this plan. Loperamide in large quantities doesn't simply sit politely in the digestive tract anymore. It begins circulating through the bloodstream in massive amounts, overwhelming the systems that normally keep it contained. Picture your body like a well-run office. Everything has a place. Everything has a job. Molecules clock in. do their daily tasks, and clock out without causing trouble. Loperamide's job is to clock in at the intestines, pat a few opioid receptors on the back, and politely excuse itself. But when you drop 200-300 tablets into your system, your bloodstream becomes less like an office and more like a crowded concert venue where the security staff has just given up. The transporter proteins, the heroic little bouncers tasked with keeping loperamide out of the brain, begin to panic. They're not equipped to deal with the biochemical equivalent of Black Friday shoppers. Their polite shoving and escorting no longer cut it. The molecules line up, push forward, overwhelm the exits. Some escape past the guards entirely, and now your body enters what scientists call, oh no. First, your digestive system starts to slow way down. The intended effect of loperamide becomes exaggerated, dramatically exaggerated. Your intestines basically throw up a closed sign. Movement stops. Gas gets trapped. Food lingers far past checkout time. Your gut, in essence, becomes a very quiet, very uncomfortable waiting room. Meanwhile, your liver and kidneys, the overworked accountants of the body, find themselves staring at a pile of chemical paperwork the size of a mountain. They start frantically processing and filtering, but the numbers don't add up. There's too much, far too much. And then your heart starts to notice, because loperamide, in giant quantities, does something it was never designed to do. It begins blocking potassium channels in the heart cells. Now, for most people, potassium is just something you vaguely associate with bananas. But inside your body, potassium currents help regulate the electrical rhythm of your heartbeat. They keep everything steady. Lub-dub, predictable, reliable. When those channels get blocked, your heart rhythm becomes improvisational, not jazz improvisational, where it's artistic and cool. More like your toddler just found the piano improvisational. Your heart tries to maintain tempo, but the signals misfire. Beats become irregular, too fast, too slow, sometimes skipping entirely. It's like the electrical grid in your chest is flickering, trying to stay online while someone keeps flipping the breaker switch. All the while, your nervous system is registering confusion. Fatigue washes over you, not normal fatigue, but the heavy kind that makes your limbs feel weighted. Your vision might blur. Your head swims. You feel faint or dizzy. You might break out in a cold sweat, the body's ultimate sign of disapproval. And yet, ironically, your intestines remain completely silent. Not a peep, not a gurgle. The one part of your body that used to complain non-stop has now entered witness protection. As more loperamide floods the bloodstream, your cardiac symptoms intensify. Palpitations, tingling. A strange sense that your chest is too tight, or your heart is pounding in a way that doesn't match anything you've ever felt before. Your body, in every possible language, is telling you, absolutely not. But because symptoms can come on gradually, many people don't realize how dangerous the situation has become. They think it's just part of withdrawal, or dehydration, or nerves. They lie down on the couch, they wait, they scroll on their phone. Meanwhile, inside, the heart's electrical patterns are growing more erratic. Your organs whisper among themselves like co-workers in a crisis meeting. Do you know what's happening? No, do you know? This wasn't in the manual. Your blood pressure dips, your heartbeat flutters, the room tilts ever so slightly. This was supposed to be the loophole, the hack, the poor man's methadone. But the body is not designed to handle loopholes. It is designed to keep you alive. And when pushed past its limit, it has only one response left. It starts shutting systems down to protect itself. In this moment, the truth becomes unavoidable. You didn't outsmart the biology. You just overwhelmed it. And biology always gets the last word. Here's where things take a much darker turn. At extremely high doses, loperamide doesn't just affect the gut. It can interfere with the electrical signals that control your heartbeat. And when those signals start malfunctioning, the heart can slip into dangerous rhythms. Now, under normal circumstances, your heart is an extremely reliable machine. It runs day and night without asking for praise, vacation time, or even a quick coffee break. Roughly once every second, a tiny electrical signal fires inside a cluster of cells called the sinoatrial node. That signal spreads across the heart muscle like a stadium wave, telling it when to contract. Lub-dub, lub-dub, lub-dub. You don't think about it. You don't need to. It's one of those background miracles of biology, like breathing or blinking or somehow remembering the lyrics to a song you haven't heard since 1997. But that rhythm depends on carefully balanced electrical currents, tiny movements of sodium, calcium and potassium ions flowing in and out of heart cells. Each heartbeat is basically a coordinated dance of charged particles moving across microscopic channels in the cell membranes. Normally this dance is elegant, graceful, predictable. Then along comes 300 anti-diarrheal pills. When loperamide floods the bloodstream at extremely high concentrations, it begins blocking certain potassium channels in the heart. These channels are responsible for helping heart cells reset after each beat. They allow potassium ions to exit the cell, restoring the electrical balance so the next heartbeat can happen on schedule. When those channels get blocked, the reset button stops working properly. The heart still tries to beat, of course. It's stubborn like that. But the timing becomes distorted. The electrical signals stretch out, slow down, and sometimes overlap in strange ways. Imagine a drummer in a band who suddenly forgets where the rhythm is supposed to land. The first few beats are just slightly off. Lub-dub, lub-dub-dub, lub-dub. But then the pattern grows stranger. Faster here, slower there. The signal circles back on itself like a confused GPS trying to recalculate. Doctors call these disturbances arrhythmias, abnormal heart rhythms. Some arrhythmias are harmless, others are very much not. One of the more frightening ones associated with high-dose loperamide is something called torsades de pointes. The name sounds almost poetic, like a French pastry or a ballet movement, but in reality it describes a very dangerous type of ventricular tachycardia. Instead of beating in a steady rhythm, the heart begins firing rapid, chaotic electrical signals. The ventricles, the chambers responsible for pumping blood to the body, start quivering in a twisting pattern. The result? Blood flow becomes inefficient. Oxygen delivery drops. The brain starts noticing the shortage. This is when people feel it. You're sitting on the couch, maybe scrolling through your phone, waiting for relief that never quite arrived. Your stomach is quiet, too quiet. But now your chest feels strange. Your heart is racing, but not in the normal way you feel after climbing stairs. It's irregular, fluttering, unpredictable. Like a fish flipping around inside your ribcage. You sit up. Your vision swims slightly. The room tilts, just a little. Your hands feel cold. A strange wave of dizziness passes over you. You might try to shrug it off. Maybe it's anxiety. Maybe it's dehydration. Maybe you just stood up too fast. But inside your chest, the electrical wiring is misbehaving in ways your body was never meant to tolerate. The heart struggles to maintain coordination. Some beats pump blood, others barely move it at all. The rhythm becomes erratic enough that the brain begins preparing for the possibility that blood flow might stop entirely. And when that happens, the next step is something no one on those internet forums was talking about. Cardiac arrest, sudden collapse, emergency rooms, defibrillators, doctors and nurses rushing to figure out why a perfectly healthy-looking person has a heart rhythm that looks like a scrambled radio signal. Because here's the cruel irony. The medication that started this story was designed to solve a simple digestive problem. It was meant to keep people out of bathrooms, not put them into ambulances. For decades, pharmacists sold it without worry. Travellers packed it into suitcases. Parents kept it next to cough syrup and band-aids. No one imagined that this quiet little pill would ever be connected to cardiac emergencies. No one expected the heart to be involved at all. And yet, as the years passed and more cases appeared, doctors across the country began noticing a pattern. Patients arriving with bizarre heart rhythms, patients with empty boxes of Imodium, patients who had unknowingly turned a harmless stomach remedy into a cardiac hazard. The body had spoken, and the heart, quite literally, was paying the price. By the early 2010s, emergency physicians began seeing a strange pattern. Patients were arriving with severe heart rhythm disturbances. Many of them were young. Many of them had no prior heart conditions. And eventually, doctors noticed something unexpected in their toxicology reports. Enormous amounts of Loperamide. Now imagine yourself working a quiet overnight shift in an emergency department. It's 3 a.m. The fluorescent lights hum softly above rows of beige curtains. The waiting room television is playing some late-night infomercial about knives that can cut through a shoe, a tomato, and possibly your will to live. Most nights follow familiar patterns. A broken wrist from someone who fell off a ladder. A stomach bug that turned a family dinner into a collective regret. Someone who sliced their finger open, attempting a heroic but ill-fated avocado maneuver. But then a patient arrives who doesn't quite fit any of the usual categories. You're called into a room where a young person lies on the bed, pale and sweating. They're dizzy. Their heart is racing in a way that makes the cardiac monitor sound like it's trying to learn jazz. Beep, 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 beep. You glance at the screen. That rhythm is not behaving itself. So the normal emergency department routine begins. Blood tests, IV lines, electrocardiograms. Nurses move efficiently, the quiet choreography of modern medicine. You ask the patient a few basic questions. Chest pain? No. History of heart disease? No. Drug use? A pause, then a shrug. Eventually the patient mentions something odd. I took some Imodium. You nod politely. Anti-diarrheal medication is not usually the plot twist in a cardiac emergency. Maybe they had a stomach bug. Maybe it's unrelated. But the blood work returns, and the toxicology report shows something strange. The level of Loperamide in the bloodstream isn't just elevated, it's astronomical. The kind of level that suggests someone didn't take 2 pills for digestive distress. They took dozens, possibly hundreds. At first, the staff assumes it's a fluke, maybe a misunderstanding, maybe a laboratory error. Someone checks the chart again. No mistake. And then it happens again. A few weeks later, another patient arrives with a nearly identical heart rhythm disturbance, young, otherwise healthy. No known cardiac problems. When the toxicology screen comes back, there it is again. Loperamide. A lot of it. By the 3rd or 4th case, emergency physicians start connecting the dots. Doctors are trained pattern detectors. Medicine, in many ways, is just a long career of noticing strange coincidences and asking uncomfortable questions about them. Why are these patients having the same heart rhythm problem? Why are they all young? Why are they all showing extremely high levels of a medication normally used for diarrhea? Meanwhile, the patients themselves often look surprised. Many of them didn't think what they were doing was especially dangerous. After all, the medication is sold over the counter. It sits quietly on pharmacy shelves between antacids and fiber supplements. If something is available without a prescription, the brain naturally assumes it must be relatively safe, which is true at normal doses. But emergency departments are now seeing the consequences of doses that are anything but normal. Doctors begin asking more direct questions. How many pills did you take? The answers can be startling. 50, 80, 100, sometimes more. Occasionally the patient admits they learned about it online. A forum, a message board, a friend who heard about it from someone else who said it worked. The emergency department begins keeping mental notes, Loperamide, arrhythmia, young patient, repeat. Eventually these observations spread beyond individual hospitals. Physicians start discussing the pattern at conferences, in medical journals, in emails to colleagues across the country. Someone writes up a case report, then another, and another. A quiet realization begins to ripple through the medical community. This isn't random, it's a trend, a strange, unexpected side effect of a medication that was never supposed to cause heart problems in the first place. The anti-diarrhea pill has quietly wandered into cardiology. Back in the emergency room, the immediate concern is stabilizing the patient. Medications to control the heart rhythm, monitoring, sometimes electrical cardioversion if the rhythm becomes dangerously unstable. But the larger mystery remains. Why are people taking so much of this drug? What are they trying to accomplish? And perhaps the most unsettling question of all, how many more patients will show up before the rest of the world notices what's happening? Because inside the emergency department, the pattern is already clear. Something weird is going on. And the humble little pill from the quiet drugstore shelf has somehow found its way into the middle of it. Meanwhile, internet forums were evolving their methods. Some users suggested combining loperamide with other drugs to block the transporter proteins that keep it out of the brain. Others recommended grapefruit juice, cimetidine, or other substances that might help the drug slip past the body's defenses. At this point, the conversation online begins to resemble a kind of underground chemistry class taught entirely by people who slept through chemistry class. You're scrolling through another late-night thread, reading posts from strangers who sound strangely confident about things that should probably require several years of medical school. Someone writes a long explanation about transporter proteins, complete with diagrams drawn in questionable software. Another user responds with something that starts with "Bro, trust me," and ends with a dosage recommendation that would make a pharmacist gently faint. And this is where the experiments get creative. One user suggests that if the body has transporter proteins actively pumping loperamide out of the brain, maybe those proteins could be blocked, not by a lab-designed medication with careful clinical trials, but by whatever happens to be available at the local pharmacy. Enter grapefruit juice. Now, grapefruit juice is famous in medical circles for interacting with certain medications. It can slow down the enzymes that normally break drugs down in the liver. Doctors usually warn patients about this because it can accidentally make some medications stronger than intended. But on the internet, warnings are often interpreted as opportunities. Someone posts, "Drink grapefruit juice first, makes the loperamide stronger." Another person suggests cimetidine, an over-the-counter heartburn medication that can also interfere with drug metabolism. Someone else adds diphenhydramine, the antihistamine found in allergy pills, because they heard it boost the effect. By now the plan resembles a smoothie recipe invented by a very reckless bartender. Step 1. Swallow dozens of anti-diarrhea pills. Step 2. Drink grapefruit juice. Step 3. Add a handful of other medications. Step 4. Hope the blood-brain barrier gets confused and lets the molecules through. From a scientific perspective, some of these ideas contain tiny fragments of truth. Certain drugs can influence transporter proteins. Certain foods can affect metabolic enzymes. But these interactions are complex, unpredictable, and absolutely not something that can be safely engineered by reading forum posts written at 3 a.m. Still, the myth grows. You read comment after comment describing stacking, a term borrowed from bodybuilding forums that now refers to combining multiple substances in the hope that they amplify each other. Someone writes about their protocol with the seriousness of a lab technician documenting an experiment. Except the experiment is happening in a kitchen, without medical supervision, without monitoring equipment, without anyone present who knows how to respond if the heart suddenly decides to improvise. Meanwhile, the advice becomes increasingly specific. Take the pills with fatty food, take the booster first, Space doses every hour. Don't take it all at once or you'll waste it. The tone shifts from curiosity to strategy, like a group of amateur hackers trying to bypass the operating system of the human body. And in a way, that's exactly what they were attempting. The body, remember, built those transporter proteins for a reason. They exist specifically to keep certain molecules from interfering with the brain's delicate balance. They are security guards, working tirelessly to keep things orderly. The forums are essentially brainstorming ways to distract the guards while the molecules sneak in the back door. From the outside, it's almost absurd. A carefully designed medication, engineered to stay in the digestive tract, is now being pushed through a series of improvised chemical loopholes using grocery store ingredients. And the strange part is how confident everyone sounds. Human beings have a remarkable ability to feel certain about things they only partially understand. Add anonymity, shared desperation, and the echo chamber of online communities, and that confidence becomes contagious. You read one success story, then 2, then 5. Never mind the posts from people who say it didn't work. Never mind the occasional message from someone who reports chest pain, dizziness, or a terrifyingly fast heartbeat. Those posts fade quickly into the background, because the internet has already moved on to refining the method. And somewhere in a quiet emergency department, doctors are still trying to understand why otherwise healthy people keep arriving with heart rhythms that look like scrambled radio signals. Meanwhile, on the forums, someone has just posted a brand new idea, a new combination, a better stack, and the crowd leans in, curious, because when desperation meets amateur chemistry, the advice rarely becomes safer, it just becomes stranger. Pharmacists across the country began noticing customers buying alarming quantities of anti-diarrhea medication. Not one box, not 2, sometimes entire shelves. People would walk into pharmacies and quietly purchase dozens of packages at a time. Now imagine yourself working behind the pharmacy counter. It's the middle of an ordinary afternoon. The store smells faintly of shampoo, printer paper, and the mysterious perfume that seems to exist only in pharmacies. Fluorescent lights hum softly above rows of neatly organized shelves. You've filled prescriptions all day. Blood pressure medication, antibiotics, a surprising number of vitamin gummies shaped like cartoon bears. The rhythm of the job is predictable. Scan the prescription, check the dosage, counsel the patient, repeat. Pharmacists live in a world of careful routines and double-checking labels, because the smallest mistake can matter. And then someone walks up to the register holding 6 boxes of Imodium. That's unusual, but not impossible. Maybe they're preparing for a long international trip. Maybe they're stocking up for a large family with extremely unfortunate digestive luck. You ring them up. The next day, someone else comes in and buys 8 boxes. Then another customer buys 10. And then one afternoon a person appears with a shopping basket full of anti-diarrhea medication, like they're preparing for the world's most uncomfortable apocalypse. At this point, your internal pharmacist alarm begins blinking. Pharmacists are trained observers. They notice patterns the way birdwatchers notice migration routes. One odd purchase doesn't mean much, but a steady trickle of customers buying industrial quantities of the same over-the-counter drug, that's worth a raised eyebrow. You glance around the store. The anti-diarrhea shelf looks oddly bare. Normally those boxes sit quietly for weeks at a time. Most people buy 1 package, maybe 2, and then disappear back into the world hoping never to think about their digestive tract again. But now the stock is vanishing, and the customers all behave a little similarly, quiet, a bit nervous, avoiding eye contact. Some pay in cash, others buy their boxes quickly and leave before anyone can ask questions. Occasionally someone wanders the aisles first, pretending to browse cough syrup while keeping one eye on the anti-diarrhea shelf like it might run away. To be fair, buying anti-diarrhea medication has always involved a certain level of embarrassment. No one walks proudly to the counter announcing, "Yes, I would like to discuss my gastrointestinal adventures, but this feels different, more urgent, more deliberate." Eventually the pharmacists begin talking to each other. One might mention it casually to a co-worker. "Hey, have you noticed people buying a lot of Loperamide lately?" Another pharmacist across town says the same thing. Then someone brings it up at a professional meeting or an online discussion group for pharmacists. Is anyone else seeing this? And suddenly it turns out that yes, many of them are seeing it. Across different cities, different states, different pharmacies, customers purchasing dozens of boxes, shelves being cleared out, the same medication, over and over again. Now, pharmacists occupy an interesting position in the medical world. They aren't just cashiers handing out pills, they're medication experts, people trained to understand how drugs work, how they interact, and what happens when something is taken incorrectly. So naturally they start wondering, why would someone need this much Loperamide? Even the worst stomach bug in recorded history wouldn't require 50 boxes. A single package contains enough doses to last several days. 2 packages might carry you through an entire international food tour of questionable street vendors. But 20 packages, 30, that begins to look less like digestive preparedness and more like something else entirely. Some pharmacists start asking gentle questions. Are you travelling? Do you need help finding something else? Sometimes the customer shrugs and mutters something about a long trip. Sometimes they say nothing at all. And sometimes they quietly admit they heard something online. The internet again. That mysterious medical advisor with zero licensing and unlimited confidence. By now the pharmacists are starting to connect a few dots. They've heard whispers from emergency departments. They've read small notes in professional newsletters about strange heart rhythm cases linked to high-dose Loperamide. The pattern is beginning to make sense. The quiet drugstore shelf has become part of a much bigger story. And behind the pharmacy counter, the professionals who spend their lives making sure medications are used safely are watching the trend unfold with a mixture of confusion and concern. Because when people start buying anti-diarrhea pills by the armful, it usually means something strange is going on. Eventually, stores started locking up Loperamide products behind the counter. The same medication that had once sat harmlessly beside cough drops was suddenly treated like a controlled substance. Now imagine walking into your neighbourhood pharmacy one afternoon. The store looks the same as it always has. Same humming fluorescent lights. Same aisle of suspiciously expensive shampoo. Same display of seasonal candy that seems to rotate from Halloween to Christmas with barely a pause for breath. You wander toward the stomach medicine aisle. Antacids are still there. Fibre supplements remain proudly lined up like tiny plastic soldiers promising digestive harmony. Motion sickness tablets sit patiently waiting for someone brave enough to read on a moving boat. But something is different. The anti-diarrhea shelf looks empty. Where the neat rows of little green Imodium boxes used to sit, there's now a small sign. Sometimes it's laminated, sometimes it's handwritten in slightly tired marker. Please ask pharmacist for assistance. You pause. This is strange. Imodium used to be one of the least dramatic products in the entire store. It lived quietly among other embarrassing but harmless medications, Pepto-Bismol, gas relief tablets, the occasional probiotic promising a happier colon. Nothing about it ever suggested controversy. But now the boxes are gone. Instead, they're locked away behind the pharmacy counter, sitting inside a cabinet usually reserved for medications that people are more likely to misuse. From the customer's perspective, this feels mildly awkward. You approach the counter and lower your voice slightly. Can I get some Imodium?" The pharmacist nods politely and retrieves a small box from the locked drawer, the same way they might retrieve certain cough medicines that contain restricted ingredients. You suddenly feel like you're participating in a secret transaction for something far more exciting than anti-diarrhea medication. But behind the scenes, the reason for the change is much less amusing. Stores had begun noticing a pattern that was impossible to ignore. Entire shelves of Loperamide disappearing overnight. Customers purchasing dozens of packages at once. Pharmacies needing to reorder stock far more often than normal. From a business perspective, this might seem like good news. After all, sales were booming. But pharmacies don't just sell products. They also carry a responsibility to protect public health. And when a medication starts showing up in alarming quantities in emergency room reports, people start paying attention. Retail chains began reviewing the situation. They spoke with pharmacists. They reviewed purchasing patterns. They read the medical warnings that were beginning to circulate about high-dose Loperamide and dangerous heart rhythm disturbances. And slowly the decision spread across the industry. If people were buying this medication in bulk for reasons that might be dangerous, maybe it shouldn't be sitting openly on a shelf anymore. So stores began moving the boxes, not banning them, not removing them entirely. Loperamide is still a very useful medication when used properly, but they added a small barrier, a locked case, a conversation with a pharmacist, a moment of pause between impulse and purchase. In some places, stores also began limiting the number of boxes a person could buy at once. 2 packages per customer, maybe 3. Enough for normal use, but not enough to swallow your way into the sort of doses being discussed online. For the average shopper, this change was mildly inconvenient. For people attempting the internet's increasingly strange Loperamide experiments, it became a serious obstacle. Buying hundreds of pills now required visiting multiple stores, multiple pharmacists, multiple awkward conversations at the counter. The quiet loophole was beginning to close, and the symbolism of it all was striking. A medication that had once been the most boring thing in the pharmacy, so boring that most people walked past it without a second thought, was now sitting behind glass like a tiny digestive criminal, locked up, monitored, handled with caution. Not because the medication itself had suddenly become dangerous, but because people had found a way to use it in ways no one had ever expected. The humble anti-diarrheal pill had become part of a much larger story, one involving internet myths, desperation, and the strange ways human creativity can collide with chemistry. And so the locked shelf became a quiet signal that something unusual had happened, something that started online, something that travelled through kitchens and pharmacies and emergency rooms, something that turned one of the least glamorous medications in the world into one of the most unexpectedly controversial. As reports of heart complications increased, the FDA began issuing warnings. They urged doctors and consumers to be aware of the risks associated with extremely high doses of Loperamide. Now imagine the quiet offices of a federal health agency somewhere in Washington, D.C. The rooms are not dramatic. There are no flashing alarms, no scientists sprinting through hallways holding beakers of glowing liquid. Instead, there are desks, spreadsheets, and the steady hum of fluorescent lights, the natural habitat of public health decisions. On one of those desks sits a growing collection of case reports. Doctors from hospitals across the country have been sending them in. Short clinical descriptions of patients arriving with unusual heart rhythm disturbances. Many of the cases share a strange detail: extremely high levels of loperamide. At first, the pattern looks odd but isolated, a few scattered incidents. But public health researchers are trained to see patterns the way meteorologists see storms forming over the ocean. One case becomes 3 becomes a dozen. Soon there are enough reports to raise a serious question. Why are people overdosing on anti-diarrheal medication? Someone begins digging through poison control data. Another researcher reviews emergency room records. A few analysts comb through toxicology results looking for common threads, and there it is again, Loperamide. Not in normal amounts, not in the 2 to 4 tablet doses printed on the box, but in levels that suggest hundreds of milligrams, sometimes dozens of times higher than the recommended maximum. The scientists already know what this means. At extremely high doses, loperamide can interfere with cardiac electrical activity, leading to arrhythmias that can be life-threatening. These are not mild side effects like drowsiness or stomach discomfort. These are the kinds of complications that send people directly to intensive care, and yet the medication is still widely available over the counter, which presents a tricky situation. Loperamide is actually a very safe drug when used correctly. Millions of people take it every year without any problems at all. It helps travellers survive unfamiliar cuisine, parents manage children's stomach bugs, and ordinary adults get through the occasional digestive rebellion. The medication itself isn't the problem. The dose is. And that creates a strange challenge for regulators. You can't simply remove a useful medication from the market because some people are using it in dangerous ways. But you also can't ignore a growing number of hospitalizations linked to misuse. So the FDA does what public health agencies often do first. They issue a warning. The announcement is not dramatic. It appears quietly on the agency's website and in medical bulletins sent to healthcare professionals. The language is careful and precise, exactly the kind of wording you would expect from scientists who spend their days choosing their words very carefully. The message is clear. Extremely high doses of loperamide can cause serious heart problems, including abnormal heart rhythms, fainting, and even death. Doctors are encouraged to consider loperamide misuse when evaluating patients with unexplained arrhythmias. Pharmacists are reminded to watch for unusual purchasing patterns. Consumers are urged to follow the dosing instructions on the package. In other words, please do not swallow hundreds of anti-diarrhea pills. For many people, this warning passes quietly by. Public health announcements rarely go viral. They are more like background music, important, steady, but easy to overlook if you're not listening closely. But within the medical community, the message spreads quickly. Emergency physicians begin asking more detailed questions when patients present with strange heart rhythms. Toxicologists include loperamide in their screening panels more frequently. Pharmacists start paying closer attention to the anti-diarrhea aisle. The humble little medication that once flew completely under the radar has now officially entered the public health conversation. And perhaps the strangest part of all is how unlikely the situation feels. Out of all the drugs in the pharmacy, the powerful antibiotics, the complex psychiatric medications, the heavy-duty painkillers, the one drawing national attention is a tiny tablet designed to calm an upset stomach. A medication that most people use to walk past without thinking twice. But now the warning has been issued. The medical world is paying attention, and the quiet pill that once lived peacefully on the drugstore shelf is now at the centre of a very unexpected story about chemistry, desperation, and the unpredictable ways people try to solve their problems. In some corners of the internet, warnings were taken seriously. In others, they were dismissed as exaggeration. As often happens online, misinformation and personal anecdotes spread faster than careful medical advice. Imagine logging into the same forums where the loperamide hack first took root. One of the top posts now reads, FDA issues warning about high-dose Imodium. The thread is exploding with comments. Some users panic, some shrug, and some, inevitably, respond with the digital equivalent of a conspiratorial wink. Because online communities often behave like crowds at a carnival. Some people wander around cautiously reading every sign, others jump on the first roller coaster without checking the height requirement, and a third group insists that the roller coaster only looks dangerous because big roller coaster safety doesn't want you to know the truth. The replies pour in. One user writes, "Guys, don't mess with this stuff, it can mess up your heart." Another responds, "The FDA always overreacts. They're just trying to scare people." A third chimes in, "I've taken 200 milligrams for months and never had a problem at lol." The lol does a lot of heavy lifting here, attempting to transform a deeply concerning admission into something casual, even comedic. That's the thing about online spaces. Tone is contagious. If someone sounds confident, even recklessly so, others begin to adopt that same confidence. Soon, the community splits into factions. These users read the FDA warning and immediately step back. They recount stories of chest pain, dizziness, and waking up sweating with a heart rhythm that felt like a drum solo gone wrong. They urge others to stop. Their comments are calm, thoughtful, and sometimes heartbreaking. "I wish someone had warned me sooner. I ended up in the ER last week. Not worth it. This stuff is dangerous. Please be careful." Their posts get some traction, especially from newer users who had no idea loperamide could affect the heart. But then another faction responds. These are the people who brush off every warning like a mosquito bite. Doctors don't know what they're talking about. I've taken this for years with zero problems. Heart issues only happen if you mix it with other stuff. They have no evidence to back these claims, but online confidence is often mistaken for credibility. Their comments get likes, they get reposted. Someone quotes them in another thread as if it's medical scripture. This is how misinformation grows, quietly, casually, wrapped in a blanket of false reassurance. This group sees the FDA warning not as a deterrent but as a challenge. They begin analysing the warning with pseudo-academic enthusiasm. Actually, if you adjust the dosage curve, the real risk is QT prolongation, but only if you hit X threshold. You just need to take magnesium with it, bro. These posts are filled with scientific vocabulary, most of it used incorrectly. But they sound smart enough that some people believe them. One user even posted a guide titled, "How to Take Loperamide Safely, Even with the FDA Warning," which is sort of like posting a how to juggle chainsaws without losing fingers tutorial. Technically interesting, practically disastrous. And then, because this is the internet, a new narrative emerges. Some users begin insisting that the FDA warning isn't about safety at all. No, the real goal, according to them, is to protect pharmaceutical profits. They argue that methadone clinics and addiction treatments lose money if people can manage withdrawal using an over-the-counter drug. Never mind that this over-the-counter drug is now being linked to lethal arrhythmias. Never mind that doctors are seeing real harm. Never mind that pharmacists are locking it away. In these corners of the internet, evidence is optional. Suspicion is king. Most users say nothing at all. They simply observe, scroll, absorb. They read the warnings but also see the reassurances. And when faced with conflicting information, many retreat to the simplest, most comforting belief. It probably won't happen to me. It's not arrogance, it's fear wrapped in denial. And so the discussions keep evolving. Some posts warn, others contradict. A few quietly disappear, deleted by users who had frightening experiences they'd rather not relive. Meanwhile, emergency rooms continue receiving patients whose hearts are malfunctioning in ways they never expected. And somewhere in the digital haze of usernames and avatars, someone new reads the conflicting advice and decides to try the experiment for themselves. Because in online communities, especially ones built around desperation, hope often outruns caution, and misinformation, it runs fastest of all. Doctors began publishing case reports describing patients who had taken staggering quantities of the drug, sometimes over 400 milligrams per day, which is dozens of times higher than recommended doses. If you've never read a medical case report, imagine a very calm scientist describing a very chaotic situation. The tone is always the same, polite, professional, and completely unfazed, even when the subject matter is people swallowing pharmaceutical quantities that defy all common sense. A typical report might begin with something like, a 32-year-old male presented to the emergency department with syncope and ventricular arrhythmia after consuming excessive amounts of loperamide. In plain English, A young person passed out because their heart decided to freestyle its rhythm after they took enough anti-diarrhea pills to medicate a small town. Each case contains subtle variations, but the themes are alarmingly consistent. Patients arrive pale, dizzy, sweating. Their hearts beat irregularly, sometimes too fast, sometimes too slow, sometimes in rhythms so disorganized that even the machines monitoring them seem confused. Doctors run tests. Electrocardiograms show prolonged QT intervals, a fancy way of saying the heart's electrical system is lagging like an old computer, trying to run too many programs at once. Blood work reveals massive amounts of Loperamide, sometimes paired with other medications people used in their misguided attempts to boost the effect. And when doctors ask, "How many pills did you take?" the answers come hesitantly, quietly, sometimes shockingly. About 200. I think 300. I lost count, a whole bottle every few hours. Doctors stare at the patient, then at the lab results, then again at the patient, trying to reconcile the fact that these individuals, many young and previously healthy, were suddenly on the brink of cardiac collapse because of a medicine usually used to survive an unfortunate burrito. One case involves a patient who took so much Loperamide that their intestines nearly shut down entirely. Food in, no food out. It was like their gut had entered a silent meditative retreat from which it did not plan to return. Another case involves a patient whose heart rhythm was so unstable that the medical team had to shock them back into normal rhythm, something you never want to experience unless you're auditioning for a medical drama. Yet another report describes someone who combined Loperamide with heartburn medication, antihistamines and grapefruit juice, creating a pharmacological cocktail that made their liver file a strongly worded complaint. And here's the strange part. Many of these patients didn't actually realize how dangerous their actions were. They weren't trying to get high. They weren't thrill-seeking. Most were simply trying to stop the misery of opioid withdrawal. They had read online that loperamide was safe, that it was basically harmless, that it was just Imodium, a phrase repeated so often that it lulled people into a false sense of security. But emergency physicians saw the reality. They saw the heart rhythms that looked like jagged, chaotic mountain ranges on the monitor. They saw blood pressure dropping, oxygen levels falling, the sudden quiet panic that fills a room when a patient begins to lose consciousness. They saw how deceptively dangerous this drug could become when used far outside its intended purpose. Some patients recovered fully, but only after intensive medical treatment. Others weren't so lucky. The reports don't dwell on those stories, they remain clinical, factual, but the message lingers between the lines. The human toll is real, even if the tone is restrained. As more doctors shared their findings, the medical community developed a clearer picture of what was happening. This wasn't a sporadic issue. It wasn't an isolated trend. It was a pattern, spreading quietly in the background of the opioid epidemic, driven by desperation and internet forums, and a profound misunderstanding of how the body handles extreme doses of a seemingly simple medication. And the case reports became more than just scientific documents. They became warnings, a way for emergency physicians to tell the world, this is happening. People are getting hurt. We need to pay attention. Because behind every sterile paragraph was a very real person, someone who never imagined that a medication meant to control diarrhea could nearly stop their heart, and someone who never intended to become the subject of a medical journal. Just someone trying to feel better, just someone trying to get through another day. And in these reports, their stories live on, quiet reminders of how quickly a harmless pill can become something else entirely when pushed far beyond its limits. When loperamide interferes with cardiac electrical signals, the heart's rhythm can become chaotic. Instead of a steady lub-dub, the electrical impulses begin misfiring in unpredictable patterns. Now, under normal conditions, your heart is a remarkably well-behaved electrical machine. Each beat begins with a tiny spark in the sinoatrial node, a cluster of cells that serves as the heart's natural pacemaker. That spark spreads across the heart muscle, moving in perfect synchrony, telling each chamber exactly when to contract. If you could watch it as a diagram, it would look like a smooth wave rippling across a pond, elegant, predictable, consistent. But once high-dose loperamide enters the picture, the physics of that electrical wave begin to warp. To understand why, imagine your heartbeat as a marathon. The electrical signals are runners who must complete a loop around the track before beginning the next lap. For the system to work, the track has to clear before the next runners start. Loperamide, when taken at extreme doses, blocks the potassium channels responsible for clearing the track. These channels allow the heart cells to reset electrically after each contraction. Without that reset, the electrical wave gets stuck, slowed, distorted. It's like having a marathon where half the runners trip and fall in the middle of the track, and the rest have to keep stepping around them, causing pile-ups, confusion, and complete chaos. When this happens inside your chest, you feel it. Your heart might flutter, or pause, or clamp down so hard it feels like it's trying to escape through your ribs. You might feel lightheaded, suddenly aware of your own heartbeat in a way that no one ever wants to be. Doctors can see this chaos clearly on an ECG strip. What should look like tidy little peaks instead becomes a jagged mountain range. The intervals between beats stretch unnaturally wide. Certain segments dip or spike like a radio signal being intercepted by aliens. This dramatic distortion is often referred to as QT prolongation, a change in the heart's electrical cycle that increases the risk of fatal arrhythmias. One particularly dangerous arrhythmia, torsades de pointe, causes the electrical signal to spiral through the ventricles in a twisting, tornado-like pattern. If a normal heartbeat is a calm metronome, torsades is that metronome getting flung down a flight of stairs. When your ventricles begin firing in this unpredictable spiral, they lose the ability to pump blood effectively. The body, especially the brain, begins losing oxygen within seconds, and the symptoms escalate. A sudden wave of nausea, cold, clammy skin, a feeling of doom, real, chemical doom flooding your chest. You might try to stand and find the world tilting to one side. You might feel your pulse racing one moment and then disappearing entirely the next. You might sense your consciousness fading around the edges, colours smearing, sounds muffling, as though someone is slowly twisting the dimmer switch on reality. This isn't anxiety. This isn't dehydration. This isn't just withdrawal. This is your heart entering a rhythm that cannot sustain life. The terrifying part is that it often happens with no warning. One moment you're sitting on a couch, scrolling through your phone, waiting for the effects of your pill experiment. The next you're gasping, dizzy, and moments away from collapsing. Inside hospitals, emergency physicians know exactly what they're looking at. An irregular heartbeat caused by a medication no one expected to behave this way. They rush forward with magnesium drips, defibrillator pads, advanced cardiac life support protocols, all tools of medical physics designed to counteract the electrical chaos unfolding inside your chest. But out in the world, alone in a kitchen or bedroom, most people experiencing this don't realize what's happening until it's almost too late. And this is why the physics matter. Your heart is not simply a muscle, it is an electrical engine. Every beat depends on the flawless timing of ion channels opening and closing in microscopic harmony. Loperamide, taken in normal amounts, never touches this delicate dance. But swallowed by the handful, it barges into the control room, flips random switches, disables safety systems, and sends sparks flying across the electrical board. And the human body, no matter how durable it seems, cannot survive for long when its engine misfires in this unpredictable, catastrophic way. Your heart, after all, has one job, and the physics of that job cannot be hacked, cheated, or brute forced, not by desperation, not by internet law, and definitely not by swallowing 300 anti-diarrhea pills. Because electrical chaos, once unleashed, does not negotiate. Unfortunately, some of these cases ended in cardiac arrest. A medication that had been considered extremely safe at normal doses suddenly became deadly when misused at extreme levels. And this is where the story stops being quirky, strange, or even darkly absurd and becomes something heavier. Because behind every case report, every ECG trace gone haywire, every emergency room scramble, there is a real person. Someone who never expected their day to end with their heart stuttering like a dying engine. Someone who thought they were taking a shortcut through suffering and instead hit a wall they never saw coming. Imagine one of these people, not as a statistic, not as a cautionary tale, but as someone sitting on a couch with a blanket pulled up over their shoulders. Someone who's trembling from withdrawal, whose skin feels electric, whose stomach is in knots, whose brain is whispering that relief doesn't exist anywhere except on the other side of another pill. They don't want a high. They don't want thrills. They want to stop hurting long enough to sleep, to breathe, to feel normal again. So they try the method they read online. They swallow the pills, wait for the relief, feel their stomach settle slightly, think for a moment that maybe, just maybe, the internet was right. Then their chest tightens, their heart skips a beat, then another, a flutter, a jolt, a dizzy moment where the colours around them blur. They stand up thinking it will pass. Instead, the room tilts violently. Their pulse becomes erratic, too fast one moment, too faint the next. Their breathing becomes shallow, panicked. They clutch their chest, confused, scared. Maybe they try calling someone. Maybe they make it to the front door. Maybe they collapse halfway there. Cardiac arrest is swift, brutal, unfair. It doesn't look like the dramatic TV version with heroic speeches and slow-motion flashbacks. It looks like a sudden silence inside the body, a moment where the electrical system that has kept you alive from your first heartbeat to this very second simply stops coordinating. When paramedics arrive, they find the scene exactly as it was left. Bottles scattered, a half-finished glass of water, a phone fallen to the floor. They start CPR. They deliver shocks. They push medications designed to force the heart's pathways back into rhythm. Sometimes they succeed, sometimes they don't. Doctors later write the case report in neutral, professional language. They note the dosage, the symptoms, the interventions, the outcome. It's their job to report, not mourn. But between the lines, the reality lingers. This was someone's friend, someone's child, someone's sibling, someone whose life veered into tragedy because they believed a rumour, because they were hurting, because they were alone, because they were desperate enough to trust advice typed by strangers on a glowing screen. And the tragedy is compounded by irony. Loperamide is so safe at normal doses you can hand it to a 10-year-old before a road trip. Entire generations of travellers have used it without a second thought. It was never designed to enter the bloodstream in such massive concentrations. It certainly was never intended to reach the heart. Yet at astronomical doses, the chemistry that once protected people becomes the very thing that harms them. Families left behind struggle to understand what happened. They ask, how could something like Imodium do this? Why didn't anyone warn us? Why would they take that much? The truth, that withdrawal drove them to it, that misinformation made it sound plausible, that biology responded with brutal clarity, is a painful answer no one wants to hear. In the aftermath, doctors push for awareness. Pharmacists tighten restrictions. Regulators publish warnings. But those actions happen after the fact, in the shadow of lives already altered or lost. and the quiet tragedy remains. All of it began with a tiny pill designed to calm an upset stomach. All of it escalated because someone believed they had found a loophole in biology. But biology doesn't deal in loopholes, it deals in limits. And once those limits are crossed, even a medication as humble as an anti-diarrheal pill can become something deadly. A heartbreaking reminder that in the human body, even the smallest chemical missteps can have enormous consequences, and that desperation, mixed with misinformation, can lead to tragedies no one ever imagined. Manufacturers responded by reducing package sizes and changing labeling. Many pharmacies limited the number of boxes customers could purchase at once. Now imagine being an executive at a pharmaceutical company whose most famous product is a small green box designed to stop unfortunate stomach events. You're used to dealing with supply chain concerns like seasonal demand spikes, shipping delays, or the occasional packaging redesign, not a sudden nationwide surge of people buying enough Loperamide to medicate an entire cruise ship. At first, the spike in sales looks profitable. Someone in accounting probably raised an eyebrow and whispered, "Wow, Americans must be really stressed lately." But then the reports start trickling in. Emails from pharmacists, calls from distributors, medical advisories mentioning heart problems, FDA bulletins with the phrase, "life-threatening arrhythmia." Suddenly that sales spike looks a lot less like success and a lot more like a liability wrapped in fluorescent green cardboard. So the manufacturers hold meetings. Many meetings. People in suits hover around conference tables, sipping lukewarm coffee and flipping through reports with increasing concern. There's a dawning realization that their humble stomach medication has ended up at the center of a public health issue that no one expected. And a decision is made. Reduce the package sizes. A box that once contained 200 tablets now contains 48. The 48 becomes 24. The 24 becomes a stingy 12 in some stores. It's a bit like turning a Costco-sized tub of cheese balls into a single-serving snack bag. Still available, still useful, but suddenly much harder to misuse on an industrial scale. The logic is simple. If someone wants to swallow massive quantities of the drug, they should at least have to work for it. The fewer pills per package, the more stores they would need to visit, and the more red flags they would trip along the way. Next comes the labeling. Manufacturers make over their boxes the way restaurants make over menus when they need customers to pay attention. Bold warnings are added. Fine print becomes less fine. New text appears. Do not exceed recommended dose. Taking more than directed can cause serious heart problems. Seek immediate medical attention if these warnings, printed in crisp ink on glossy cardboard, are meant to be seen, meant to confront people in pharmacy aisles who think quantity is a loophole rather than a hazard. Meanwhile, pharmacies themselves begin developing their own strategies. It starts with simple limits. 2 boxes per customer, then 1 box per customer. Some chains require the medication to be requested at the pharmacy counter. Others keep it in locked acrylic cases beside cough syrups that contain restricted ingredients. Store managers, who previously spent their days organizing end-cap displays and tracking seasonal allergy medicine, now find themselves discussing anti-diversion policies for Imodium. It's surreal. They never imagined the day when anti-diarrheal medication would need the same treatment as pseudoephedrine. But the supply chain adjustments don't stop at the retail level. Distributors, the middlemen who shuttle products from factories to pharmacies, begin noticing unusual purchasing patterns as well. Some stores are ordering far more Loperamide than others. Some orders look suspiciously frequent. Automated systems flag anomalies. Reports are filed. It becomes clear that this isn't just a consumer trend. It's a distortion of the normal flow of products. A medication designed for rare digestive emergencies is being consumed in quantities that defy both logic and biology. And with each new measure implemented to restrict misuse, unintended consequences appear. Some people switch to buying online, which triggers another wave of monitoring and policy changes. Others travel to multiple stores, clearing out shelves one by one like desperate bargain hunters on Black Friday. Few turn to bulk suppliers, unaware that large-scale orders attract attention from entirely different agencies. The supply chain itself, the quiet machinery that keeps pharmacies stocked and manufacturers afloat, begins reshaping around the phenomenon. What used to be a predictable, almost boring system becomes reactive, cautious, vigilant. Even the marketing team step back. No more cheerful commercials featuring animated digestive systems dancing around happily. No playful jingles. No smiling actors giving thumbs up near beach towels or picnic baskets. The entire tone shifts from light-hearted to serious, even somber. Because the reality is unavoidable. A product once viewed as innocuous now carries the shadow of risk. Behind every change, every smaller box, every stern label, every locked cabinet is a story of someone who misused the medication, someone who ended up in an emergency room, someone whose heart couldn't keep its rhythm under the chemical strain. Manufacturers can't undo that. Pharmacies can't ignore it. Regulators can't pretend it's just a phase. And so the supply chain adapts, reshapes, reacts, trying to protect people from a danger few saw coming and fewer still understand. A danger that began not in labs or factories, but in quiet living rooms, lonely kitchens, and internet forums full of desperate hope. The supply chain is simply responding to the truth. Even the most harmless pill can become something else entirely when taken far beyond what the human body was ever designed to endure. Eventually, as awareness spread and restrictions increased, discussion of loperamide as a substitute opioid began to fade from many forums. At first, it's subtle. A few old threads get locked. A moderator posts a sticky note at the top of the page reminding users that discussing unsafe dosing practices is prohibited. A handful of members, those who have seen enough hospital nights to last a lifetime, begin gently pushing back on dangerous claims. New users searching for the old Imodium protocol find fewer results, fewer cheerleaders, fewer enthusiastic testimonials typed at 3 a.m. by exhausted hands. Because the internet, like any living organism, has a limited attention span. It shifts, drifts, flits to the next topic. What once felt like a revolutionary loophole begins to feel like yesterday's myth. And slowly, the community moves on, not because the dangers are fully understood, and not necessarily because the lessons have been learned, but simply because the collective focus has turned elsewhere. But the fade isn't clean or immediate. For months, old posts linger like ghost lights, dim, hollow, commented on by confused newcomers who wonder why no one talks about this hack anymore. Some users, once vocal evangelists of loperamide experimentation, delete their accounts. Others post apology threads, admitting they landed in the ER and urging people to stay away. A few vanish without explanation, leaving half-finished conversations trailing into digital silence. You can almost feel the forum exhale. It isn't that everyone suddenly becomes cautious. It's that interest disperses. The novelty wears off. The risks become clearer, and the community starts drifting toward new ideas, new shortcuts, new misguided theories whispered into the glow of computer screens. Because online culture moves like a school of fish, swiftly, unpredictably, reacting to subtle signals that most individuals never consciously perceive. And yet, even as the buzz disappears, remnants of the Loperamide era remain. Some users post long reflections saying things like, "I can't believe we were doing that. Glad that phase is over. Did anyone else have lasting heart issues?" Others, still struggling with dependence or withdrawal, wander into new threads seeking answers. They don't bring up loperamide, not anymore. They've noticed the unease, the lack of replies, the way people shift awkwardly at the mention of those old doses. Instead, they ask broader, quieter questions. How do you get through this without relapsing? What actually helps with the restlessness? Has anyone found a safe method that works? And the responses, while imperfect, have changed tone. More caution, more humility, less blind enthusiasm for chemical shortcuts. But the internet never forgets completely. Somewhere, deep in page 47 of a forgotten forum, an old post still sits, describing doses that make your heart clench just reading them. A relic of a moment when misinformation travelled faster than medical facts, when DIY pharmacology seemed like clever innovation, when desperation met curiosity in a way that quietly endangered countless lives. Those threads become time capsules of a digital era that moved too fast for the real world to keep up. Eventually, articles appear on respectable websites. Why people were taking hundreds of anti-diarrheal pills to get high, the hidden dangers of loperamide misuse. FDA advises caution after rise in Imodium-linked heart cases. As mainstream awareness grows, the forums shrink their discussions. Some users feel embarrassed. Others feel angry. Many feel lucky. Lucky they avoided the worst. Lucky they survived the experiment. Lucky they didn't become the subject of a case report written in calm medical prose about a tragedy no one intended. And the strangest part? Most people don't leave because they finally understood the biology, or because they suddenly gained medical insight, or because they realized that loperamide never really worked the way they hoped. They leave because interest fades, because the dopamine rush of novelty evaporates, because online communities have the attention span of a fruit fly at a light show. Somewhere, a new theory will spark, a new substitute will be whispered, a new solution will begin its slow climb through the digital grapevine. But loperamide, its moment passes, it sinks back into obscurity, back to its rightful place in the quiet pharmacy aisle, beside cough drops and heartburn tablets. Back to solving the problem it was actually designed to solve. Yet the memory stays. For those who lived through that era, who watched the warnings spread, who read the case reports, who felt their own hearts flutter with electrical chaos, the chapter never fully closes. Because the internet might move on quickly, but bodies don't forget so easily, and neither do the people whose lives were changed, frightened, or nearly lost in the search for relief that loperamide was never meant to provide. Doctors and researchers studied the phenomenon as a cautionary example of how ordinary medications can become dangerous when combined with desperation and misinformation. In the years following the strange rise and equally strange decline of high-dose loperamide misuse, the medical community found itself looking back with a combination of disbelief, concern, and hard-earned wisdom. It became one of those unexpected case studies that medical students now learn about during lectures with titles like Unintended Consequences of Readily Available Medications or When the Gut Drug Attacks the Heart. Because on paper, loperamide was the least dramatic substance anyone could imagine. It wasn't a narcotic, it wasn't psychoactive, it wasn't even remotely glamorous. It was designed to solve the quietest of bodily embarrassments, something people whispered about at pharmacy counters while avoiding eye contact. Yet somehow, through a perfect storm of pain, confusion, internet folklore, and the opioid epidemic, this humble medication had ended up in the crosshairs of emergency physicians nationwide. Doctors began discussing the phenomenon at conferences. Someone would step up to a podium and present the now familiar slides. A patient with no cardiac history, an ECG showing an impossibly prolonged QT interval, a toxicology screen overflowing with loperamide, a desperate attempt to self-manage withdrawal. The room would fall quiet. Medical professionals weren't judgmental. They understood all too well how people in pain, fear, or withdrawal can make decisions they would never normally consider. but what struck them most was how predictable the tragedy became once the case reports started piling up. Because chemically, the clues were there all along. Loperamide was an opioid that just happened to stay in the gut. It was safe not because it was inherently harmless, but because the brain kept it at arm's length. Once someone swallowed enough to overwhelm that system, the drug began revealing its darker potential. And the medical community realized something uncomfortable. They had underestimated the role of human ingenuity. Not the good kind, where innovation leads to vaccines, space travel and self-driving cars, but the desperate kind. The type born from suffering, whispered rumors, and poorly moderated forums. Physicians began asking themselves, how do we stop this from happening again? With this drug or the next one? How do we communicate dangers before misinformation spreads faster than facts? How do we protect people who are searching for relief in all the wrong places? Researchers published papers analysing the behavioural patterns behind the trend. They traced how loperamide misuse began with isolated anecdotes and snowballed into a pseudo-scientific movement fueled by online communities that were trying desperately to help one another survive withdrawal. Sociologists weighed in too, pointing out the underlying drivers: lack of access to treatment, stigma around addiction, and the sheer cost of medical care. The misuse of loperamide wasn't just a chemistry problem, it was a social one. Addiction specialists reflected on the tragedy from another angle. They saw the pattern in clinic after clinic: people cut off from opioids too quickly, people ashamed to seek help, people terrified of detoxing alone. For them, loperamide wasn't a loophole, it was a last resort, and the outcome, more often than not, was catastrophic. But out of these reflections came something constructive. New guidelines were established. Withdrawal management recommendations became more compassionate. Medical education began, including warnings about the misuse of everyday drugs. Public health campaigns emphasized harm reduction rather than fear. Some clinics began asking specifically about loperamide when patients presented with fainting or palpitations. Even the language surrounding addiction shifted, becoming less moralistic and more rooted in understanding the actual neurobiology behind dependence. Because the medical community realized a hard truth: when people have no safe alternatives, they will create unsafe ones. And if those unsafe alternatives happen to be cheap, accessible, and misunderstood, then the recipe for disaster is complete. Reflecting on the loperamide era became a meditation on vulnerability, not just of patients, but of systems. A reminder that science doesn't exist in a vacuum, and that even the best designed drug can become dangerous when lifted out of its intended context and placed into a world shaped by stigma, fear, and misinformation. In lecture halls, doctors would end their talks with quiet caution. This is what happens when suffering meets accessibility. This is why education matters. This is why we must listen to patients before they become case reports. And in that sense, the saga of loperamide became more than a bizarre footnote in pharmaceutical history. It became a mirror, reflecting how fragile the boundary is between safety and danger, how quickly misinformation can transform medicine, and how essential it is to meet desperation with compassion rather than silence. Because when medicine fails to understand people, people will try to rewrite the rules themselves, and sometimes those rewritten rules can stop a heartbeat. Today, loperamide remains an effective and widely used medication when taken properly. For most people, it quietly does the job it was designed to do: calm the digestive system and move on. And yet it now carries with it one of the strangest legacies in modern pharmaceutical history, a footnote so bizarre that future medical students will probably read about it and say, wait, people did what? Because Imodium, of all things, somehow became the star of a brief chaotic moment when the internet turned a simple anti-diarrhea pill into an underground withdrawal remedy, a DIY pharmacology experiment, and, unintentionally, the centre of a public health scare. It's surreal when you think about it. This little green box was once one of the least glamorous household items imaginable. It had the personality of a beige wall, the charisma of a spam email, the raw excitement of a tax form. Most people kept it in the back of a bathroom cabinet just in case their stomach made bad decisions at a buffet. And for the overwhelming majority of users, it remains exactly that. Simple, helpful, boring. But the legacy of that short-lived epidemic lingers like a strange echo. Doctors remember the odd spike in unexplained arrhythmias. Pharmacists remember the sudden run on anti-diarrheal stock. Regulators remember issuing warnings about a drug no one ever expected to worry about. And researchers remember realizing that even the safest substances can become dangerous when desperation enters the chat. It's a reminder of a strange truth about human nature. If something might help, even in theory, someone, somewhere, will try it. And if the rumor spreads far enough, many will. Even if it means swallowing hundreds of pills designed for an entirely different purpose. This legacy also reshaped how people think about ordinary medications. It challenged the assumption that over-the-counter equals harmless. It forced regulators, manufacturers, and healthcare providers to consider the ways everyday drugs can become tools for unintended use. Not because people are irresponsible, but because they're trying to survive pain with whatever resources they have. Some addiction specialists now bring up the Imodium chapter when discussing harm reduction. They use it to highlight the enormous gap between what people need during opioid withdrawal and what they actually have access to. They point to this strange phenomenon as evidence that cutting off prescriptions without support doesn't eliminate addiction. It just sends people searching for alternatives, sometimes disastrously poor ones. Meanwhile, pharmacists sometimes tell it as a kind of cautionary tale in their training programs, a reminder that behind every unusual purchasing pattern may be someone struggling silently with something bigger than stomach trouble. And online, the legacy remains as a whisper. Old threads still exist, some archived, some locked, some abandoned. You can scroll through them like an archaeological dig into early 2010s internet culture. There are usernames you'll never meet again. Advice that, in hindsight, reads like a time bomb. Desperate comments, skeptical comments, encouraging comments, deleted comments. It's all there, preserved in digital amber. If you didn't know better, you'd think you were reading fiction. Because who could imagine that a medication meant to soothe camping trip stomach bugs would end up being swallowed in handfuls by people trying to outrun withdrawal? A pill designed to slow digestion was repurposed to treat something it was never meant to treat, and in doses that no digestive tract, no heart, no human biology could handle. Yet through all the chaos, one thing remained true. Loperamide itself never changed. Its chemistry didn't shift. Its intended purpose didn't waver. Its quiet efficiency in normal doses continued without incident. It wasn't the drug that created the problem, it was the context, the pain people were in, the desperation they felt, the misinformation they encountered, the lack of safe, accessible alternatives. And so today, Imodium sits back on the shelf where it always belonged, humble, discreet, minding its own business. Most shoppers pick it up without a second thought, unaware that they're holding a medication with one of the strangest accidental underground histories of the century. A medication that became a loophole, a hazard, a folk remedy, a cautionary tale, and ultimately a reminder. Even the most ordinary things can take on extraordinary and sometimes dangerous roles when people are trying to navigate suffering in a world that doesn't always give them the help they need. But the strange episode of the Loperamide epidemic revealed something deeper about modern medicine, addiction, and the power of online communities to shape behaviour. Because beneath the bizarre details, The hundreds of pills, the locked shelves, the grapefruit juice boosters, the emergency room ECGs that look like avant-garde art. There is a central truth humming quietly underneath all of it. People don't turn to desperate solutions unless they feel they have no other choice, and this entire story, strange as it is, becomes a mirror for the gaps in the systems meant to protect us. Consider the first part of the lesson. Modern medicine saves lives, but it doesn't always understand suffering. Doctors saw a rise in opioid dependence and reacted the only way the system knew how: tighten regulations, restrict prescriptions, reduce availability. It wasn't malicious, it wasn't careless. It was an attempt to stop a growing problem, but when the prescriptions vanished, the pain didn't, the dependence didn't, the withdrawal didn't. And so people looked for relief anywhere they could find it. The medical community eventually recognized this. They began shifting toward more compassionate approaches, more gradual tapers, more resources for those trying to step away from opioids, not because anyone intended harm, but because the Loperamide crisis forced everyone to see how abrupt policy changes can push people into dangerous improvisation. Then there's the second part of the lesson. Addiction is not a moral failure, it's a relationship between a person and their own neurobiology. People weren't misusing Imodium for fun. No one was excited to swallow 300 anti-diarrheal tablets for sport. They did it because their bodies were in revolt, because withdrawal felt like electricity on the nerves, like gravity malfunctioning, like their entire being was rejecting itself from the inside out. Addiction makes the brain cling to anything that promises relief, even if that promise is faint, unverified, or risky. And the Loperamide era demonstrated something heartbreaking. If relief is inaccessible, dangerous alternatives will take its place. Which leads to the third lesson. The internet is powerful, sometimes more powerful than medicine itself. People trust strangers online in ways that are hard to explain. Maybe because the anonymity feels safe. Maybe because shame dissolves when no one sees your face. Maybe because pain makes us willing to believe anything that sounds even remotely hopeful. Forums became substitute support groups. Threads became makeshift clinics. Anecdotes became treatment plans. But the internet has a strange flaw. It amplifies confidence, not accuracy. A single reckless post can drown out a dozen cautious warnings. And once an idea goes viral, even a bad one, it becomes resilient. Loperamide's rise and fall wasn't driven by science. It was driven by stories. Stories from people who felt better. Stories from people who didn't know the risks. Stories from people who meant well but didn't understand what they were sharing. In the end, the epidemic wasn't about a drug at all. It was about human behaviour. And the final part of the lesson is perhaps the most important. People will do almost anything to avoid suffering, especially when they feel alone in it. If someone had told the early experimenters, if you try this, your heart could stop, maybe they would have reconsidered. But many weren't thinking about tomorrow. They were thinking about surviving the next hour. And when the medical system doesn't catch someone in that moment, when the safety net has gaps, people will invent their own ladders, even if those ladders are made of unstable rungs and wishful thinking. So the strange saga of Loperamide leaves behind a quiet wisdom. That compassion in medicine is not optional. That harm reduction saves lives. That information is a powerful double-edged force. And that no drug, no matter how boring, how harmless, how unremarkable, exists in a vacuum. Because humans are inventive, humans are desperate, humans are hopeful, and humans, when pain backs them into a corner, will search for help wherever they can find it, even in the most unlikely corners of a drugstore shelf. The story of Loperamide is not just weird, it is human. And the lesson hidden inside it is simple. When people have support, they make safer choices. When they don't, they make whatever choices pain allows. And so the anti-diarrhea aisle returned to its normal sleepy existence. Boxes stacked neatly. labels promising digestive relief. A humble medication doing exactly what it was meant to do, no more, no less. If you visited a pharmacy today, you'd never guess that this little corner once played host to one of the strangest chapters in modern drug history. The shelves look the same as they always have. Orderly, calm, unbothered by the chaos of the world. There's no drama here, no controversy. Just row after row of small, slightly embarrassed-looking boxes quietly offering to help if your stomach decides to go rogue during lunch. The fluorescent lights hum overhead. Customers walk past without giving the shelf a second glance. And honestly, the shelf seems relieved. This is its natural habitat. Mundane, predictable, wonderfully uneventful. To anyone just looking around, nothing appears unusual. The anti-gas tablets are still arranged like tiny pastel soldiers. The probiotics remain full of bold promises about gut harmony, as if your intestines are members of a choir that occasionally sing off-key. The fibre supplements exude the energy of a well-meaning but slightly overbearing aunt. Everything is back to normal. But beneath that normalcy is a kind of stillness that wasn't there before, an unspoken recognition of what this aisle once represented. For pharmacists, it's a reminder that even the quietest medications can suddenly demand vigilance. For doctors, it's a reminder that the line between safe and dangerous isn't drawn in ink, it's drawn in dose. For researchers, it's proof that human ingenuity doesn't always lead to innovation. Sometimes, it leads to people trying to swallow entire blister packs of medication. For people who live through withdrawal, it's a reminder of how easily desperation can reshape the ordinary into something risky. For everyone else, the shelf is back to being invisible, fading once again into the background of everyday life. And to be fair, Loperamide seems perfectly content with that. It doesn't want attention, it never did. Its entire personality is built around subtle, quiet effectiveness. It's the medication equivalent of a helpful neighbour who doesn't talk much but will always bring your trash bin in from the curb without being asked. It's hard to imagine, standing there in the aisle, that this tiny tablet was once swallowed by the handful, that it once caused heart rhythms to go haywire, that it once triggered FDA warnings, pharmacy restrictions, supply chain disruptions, and late-night internet debates featuring people who were a little too confident in their homemade biochemistry theories. Because now it has returned to the role it was always meant to play, helping someone get through a rough morning, helping a traveller survive unfamiliar cuisine, helping a parent dealing with the consequences of a toddler eating something mysterious from the floor, helping a college student who made unfortunate decisions at a discount burrito truck. It's doing the job it was designed for, silently, efficiently, modestly. And the aisle around it has resumed its peaceful, slightly awkward charm, a place where nobody really wants to linger, but everyone needs at one point or another, a place where the products whisper, "Everything will be okay." Just follow the instructions and drink some water. The bizarre saga of high-dose loperamide misuse didn't change the chemistry of the medication. It didn't change its purpose. It didn't change its usefulness. What it did change was our understanding of how even the most ordinary tools can be reshaped by extraordinary circumstances. And perhaps that's why the quiet pharmacy shelf feels different now, not visibly, but in meaning. It has become a symbol of a moment when modern pain met modern misinformation in one of the most unexpected places imaginable. But time moves forward, the internet moves on, the warnings stay printed on the box, and Loperamide stays where it always belonged, right between the rehydration salts and the chalky pink stomach syrup, part of the quiet machinery of everyday human survival. Back to being boring, back to being safe, back to being just Imodium, which, in the end, is exactly where this story was always meant to land, right here, on a quiet shelf, full of quiet medicine living its quiet little life once again. Let's talk about the moment everything begins, not in a pharmacy, not on a message board, but in the quiet misery of opioid withdrawal. You wake up sweating through your shirt even though the room isn't hot. Your muscles ache like you've run a marathon through gravel. Your stomach churns. Your bones feel hollow. Withdrawal has a way of turning the human body into a protest movement. And when your brain realizes the drugs it relied on are suddenly gone, it begins searching desperately for anything at all that might make the symptoms stop. Because this is the part that outsiders rarely understand. Withdrawal is not just discomfort. It's a full-body rebellion. It's your nervous system filing complaints in all caps. It's your skin buzzing like it's plugged into an outlet. It's hot flashes, cold sweats, bone-deep aches, crawling anxiety, and a nausea so heavy it feels geological. Your brain, which once hummed quietly under the influence of opioids, is suddenly exposed to the raw light of its own unfiltered chemistry. Your thoughts become jagged. Your patience disappears. Your body begs, first politely, then violently, for relief. You try pacing the room, but the restlessness grows. You try lying still, but your muscles twitch with electric unease. Time itself becomes syrupy and slow. Minutes stretch into hours. Hours stretch into something worse. Your stomach flips in loops. Your legs kick without permission. Your mind claws at any memory of relief, as though it could conjure comfort by sheer force of longing. And deep beneath all this suffering, your brain is doing math. Not the elegant kind with neat answers, the survival kind. What did you used to take? Can you get more? Should you call someone? Should you wait it out? Should you try something else? Something strange? Something someone once mentioned in passing? Withdrawal shrinks your world until it's just you and your symptoms. Your heart beats too fast. Your skin feels too thin. Your mind races. Your stomach growls and protests like an angry old radiator. You scroll through your phone, not because you expect a miracle, but because distraction is the only thread holding your sanity together. There are forums for everything. Pain management, addiction recovery, harm reduction, late-night confessionals typed by trembling hands. Some messages sound cautious, some hopeful, some reckless. But one thing is constant. Everyone there understands what you're feeling, and when you're suffering this intensely, that matters. Someone on a forum says it gets better if you drink water. Someone else says, try a hot shower. Another adds, ginger tea helps nausea. But the messages blur together because the storm inside you is too loud. You're not looking for slow comfort. You're looking for relief, fast, powerful, merciful. Then, somewhere deep in a thread you didn't mean to click on, you see the claim, Imodium helped my withdrawal. You blink. Imodium? The anti-diarrheal pill? The thing you take when a gas station sandwich betrays you? It sounds absurd, laughable even, but someone else chimes in, then another. Someone posts a half-baked explanation about opioid receptors in the gut. Someone else insists it reduced their symptoms by like 70%. No one agrees on the science, yet everyone agrees on one thing. It might help. And in withdrawal, might is a powerful word. Because your brain, in its distressed and unregulated state, isn't evaluating clinical data. It's evaluating hope. And hope, even strange, improbable hope, starts looking like a lifeline. You imagine walking to the pharmacy. You imagine the cold air on your skin, the fluorescent lights, the shelves lined with medications that promise relief for problems far simpler than yours. You imagine grabbing a box, maybe two, and telling yourself it's worth trying. Because what's the alternative? Another night of this. Another hour of this. Withdrawal feels like drowning in your own body. Loperamide at first glance looks like a float. You're not thinking about heart rhythms. You're not thinking about chemistry. You're not thinking about risk. You're thinking about survival. And so the search begins, not because anyone wanted it to, but because suffering drives people toward whatever relief the world places within reach. It starts here, in this quiet, desperate moment. Not in a pharmacy, not in a laboratory, not in a case report. In a room where someone is shaking, sweating, hurting, terrified, and willing to believe that even the most unlikely pill might whisper comfort into the chaos. And so the day winds down. You've wandered through pharmacies, internet forums, emergency rooms, and the strange corners of human ingenuity where desperation sometimes leads people to make decisions that, in hindsight, seem almost impossible to believe. You started with a tiny pill designed for one very boring purpose: calming an upset stomach. But somewhere along the way, curiosity, addiction, and the strange collective brainstorming power of the internet turned that humble medicine into something far more dangerous than its creators ever intended. Tonight you learned how people swallowed hundreds of pills meant for diarrhea hoping to outsmart biology. And biology, as it turns out, rarely appreciates being outsmarted. Yet behind the strange headlines and alarming statistics, there is something deeply human in this story. People searching for relief, people trying to quiet pain, physical or emotional, using whatever tools they could find. Sometimes those tools helped, sometimes they didn't, and sometimes, like in the case of Loperamide, a perfectly ordinary medication ended up playing a role in a much bigger and sadder chapter of modern history. But there's also another side to the story. Doctors noticing patterns, pharmacists raising quiet concerns, researchers studying what went wrong so it could be prevented the next time curiosity meets chemistry in unexpected ways. Because history, whether it happens in medieval villages or modern pharmacies, is full of moments where people stumble, learn, and slowly adjust. So tonight, as you settle into a clean bed, in a world where most medications are tested, labelled, and carefully dosed, you might whisper a small thank you to the quiet systems around you, to pharmacists who double-check labels, to doctors who ask questions, to researchers who spend years figuring out why things go wrong, and maybe even to the humble little pills sitting quietly on pharmacy shelves, doing exactly what they were designed to do. Nothing more, nothing less. Because history, strange as it can be, is really just a long story about people trying to make life a little easier, sometimes succeeding, sometimes learning the hard way. And now the pharmacies are quiet again. The shelves are stocked, the lights are dim, and hopefully, somewhere far away from late-night internet experiments and questionable medical advice, you can drift off to sleep. Good night.